the 2023 Annual United Nations General Assembly debate begins today in New York. The general debate of the United Nations General Assembly is the opportunity for heads of state and government to come together at the UN headquarters and discuss world issues. The climate crisis and the war in Ukraine are expected to figure prominently as more than 140 leaders and state representatives from around the world address the 78th session of the UN General Assembly. The high-level general debate, which begins on Tuesday, September 19th, following 2 weeks of meetings, is the most widely watched event in the UN's annual calendar. It provides world leaders and heads of state the opportunity to lay out their priorities for the coming year, urge cooperation on pressing issues, and often call out their adversaries. This year's general debate is being held under the theme Rebuilding Trust and Reigniting Global Solidarity, Accelerating Action on the 2030 Agenda and its Sustainable Development Goals towards peace, prosperity, progress, and sustainability for all. And as world leaders convene in New York City this week for the UN General Assembly, the event is met with increased police presence and many changes to the city operations to ensure assembly security. Our correspondent, Byrd, has more.
The 8th UN General Assembly is being met with much expectation from the world, as this assembly marks a crucial milestone in the journey towards achieving the 2030 Agenda. New York City is hosting one of the largest assemblies in recent history, as the focus will be on rebuilding trust and reigniting global solidarity, accelerating action on the 2030 Agenda and its sustainable development goals toward peace, prosperity, progress, and sustainability for all. Heads of state and government and ministers will work to solve some of the world's most challenging global issues to advance peace, security, and sustainable development. New York City Police, Transit Authority, and government officials have been preparing for one of the most high security assemblies in the world. Most of the streets in Midtown Manhattan, New York City, have been blocked off to ensure UN security. While New York City is home to the United Nations, it is also making sure that it takes every precaution necessary to ensure the global leaders are safe and secure while the assembly is taking place. This General Assembly will take place in one of the largest cities in the world and is expected to host thousands of world leaders and officials during the high-level meetings and will tackle the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. From New York City, Byrd, Channel Television News.
Let's hear from one of our other correspondents, Juliana Olanka, who joins us again for an update on today's meeting. Juliana, good to hear from you today.
Good afternoon, Joker. I'm just actually stuck in traffic. It's really, really busy, as to be expected, as explained by Maria in that report. And as I've been saying on air over the past couple of hours, we've got thousands of foreigners who are in New York this week, not just for the UN General Assembly, of course, but for other bilateral meetings. It's also raining, so it is very difficult, but we're here. And we're on the ground and we're covering extensively.
Right, so what's the plan for today?
Well, the plan for today is that lots of discussions have already taken place. In terms of the UNGA, UNGA, the 78th session, that really is about tomorrow, of course, which is the high-level debate. We are expecting at least 140 world leaders or significant individuals within nations to address the UN General Assembly. We know that sustainable development is one of the key themes, as well as, of course, how we are going to end this very bloody war in Ukraine, as well as what the future is for the continent of Africa, considering there has been so much tension over the past few years. President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, of course. President Bola Ahmed Tinubu is in town. He is going to be addressing world leaders, I believe, at about 8 p.m. Local time, local Nigerian time tomorrow. And also we are expecting to hear from the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. He will be in New York for the second time since the war broke out. So it's going to be very, very busy. Tomorrow is the main day, Joker, but of course today has also been particularly hectic, not just because of the weather.
Yeah, right, Juliana. So you just spoke about President Bola Tinubu and, some of the things that he's going to do today. Of course, from his ministers as well, we have a pretty good idea of, what the kind of things he'll be talking about. So what are you learning about the preparations for tomorrow on the side of the Nigerian delegation?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. We do have a full delegation, as we always do, when it comes to New York and the UNGA gathering. I did see the president last night after his arrival. He briefly spoke with some private sector heads who are also in town. I believe today he has already conducted one or two bilaterals. I was saying very early this morning when I spoke to Laddie that I did get a glimpse of the president's diary. And I know today there are at least 3 bilaterals. One, I believe, involves the South African president, Cyril Ramaphosa. Also in town, who I've seen, is the Minister for Solid Minerals, Dele Alake. I believe the Minister for Industry, Trade and Investment is also here. As to be expected, we do have the Minister of Finance, the Coordinating Minister of the Economy, Wale Eden here, a very popular person, lots of individuals very keen to speak to him. So it's already kicking off with Nigeria. There's a lot of buzz around Nigeria, Jockey. I've got to tell you, I know that we're not always making headlines for the right reason, but in New York, everybody wants to speak to the Nigerian delegation. Everybody wants to speak or have at least 5 minutes with President Bola Ahmed Tinubu. And I think that's reflected with the fact that Wall Street have called him to come and close the NASDAQ bell on Wednesday afternoon. That's also going to be a really big place in the diary, shall we say, just showing that Britain is open for business, yes, but Nigeria is certainly open for business. We've got a large diaspora crowd in New York doing very, very well on Wall Street. And so, yes, this is a great celebration of that, but lots of busy meetings, lots of running around over the next few days.
Yes, I can certainly imagine that there are usually other meetings on the sidelines of the UNGA, as you have just mentioned. For instance, the Sustainable Development meetings are scheduled to take place. Do we understand what the focus is and the countries actively participating in this?
Well, yeah, that's absolutely right. I think sustainable development has always been a key agenda for United Nations. One thing I didn't just mention, Jockey, is the fact that, we've got 4 of the P5 members not in town, and that's a massive story, because, of course, the UN, some people say it's a bit outdated. It is still a very important gathering of world leaders. We haven't got Xi Jinping, we don't have Vladimir Putin, we don't have Rishi Sunak, we don't have Emmanuel Macron. That's a slight stain, because climate change and the climate emergency is a massive talking point for leaders of the global south. We've seen some devastating effects of what extreme weather can do currently in Morocco and in Libya. And so it's a shame that we won't have significant players, significant carbon emitters here to talk about some of the pledges and the promises. And that really is the basis of the sustainable development discussions that are going to be taking place. Are world leaders going to stick with the pledges that they made in Paris in 2015? And what are those funds going to do to mitigate against climate change, and also let the money trickle down to those who need it, most importantly?
And yeah, Juliana, New York is usually a very, very busy area any time of the year, and then especially when events like this are taking place. So how are New Yorkers dealing with the changes on ground, especially sharing their walking time with strangers and so many people that have come in for this important event?
Millennial. Yes, sorry, Jockey, I was just stopped by the police. If you could repeat that question.
Right. I did say that New York is usually very busy anytime, with the tourists, with the people themselves. So how are they coping with the influx of people sharing their walking, peak period walking times with them, if I can put it that way?
You're absolutely right. New York is the center of discussion. Obviously, it's the host city. Look, I think this is great for the city of New York. Let's not forget that even though countries in the global north are doing very well, we are still trying to come out of the pandemic. So I think it's important that the hotels are busy, the restaurants are full, people are spending. Our networking, and the fact that we've got 4 out of the 5 P5 nations missing. This is great for Joe Biden. He takes center stage. I know there are a lot of people that may cringe anytime he speaks, but really this is his event. And, the UNGA is a one-of-a-kind event. Over 140 leaders, tens of thousands of people in the city to make money, to make progress, and to, try to shape a better world. So, yes, it is very busy. It's very damp. We are hoping that, the weather will settle down. But yeah, really busy in New York.
Right, Juliana, let me leave you to your news gathering and hope to get more updates from you as soon as you get them, during the course of the day. Our correspondent, Juliana Olanka in New York. And so you already know by now that the Nigerian President Bola Tinubu arrived on Sunday for the UN General Assembly. It's his first UNGA meeting since he was sworn in as president in May. According to a statement by presidential spokesman Ajuri Ngelale, the president is expected to hold bilateral meetings with various world leaders, including US President Joe Biden and EU Commission President von der Leyen on the sidelines of the summit. The president is also expected to meet with the global president of Microsoft, Brad Smith, as well as the head of global affairs for Meta Technologies, Nick Clegg. He is also expected to deliver his inaugural national statement on the floor of the UN headquarters on September 19th. On Wednesday, September 19th, the president will address American business leaders at the US Chamber of Commerce and conduct the NASDAQ closing ceremony. Also in New York and on the sidelines of the leaders' meetings, the former Emir of Kano, Sanusi Lamido Sanusi, reiterated the need to achieve the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and a need for continued advocacy in Africa. He was speaking with our correspondent, Larry Lasisi.
Well, I'm one of the Secretary General's advocate on SDGs. And right now we're going for a meeting with the Secretary General. And usually what we do is basically look at the progress on SDGs, indicate the work we have done and our plans for continuing advocacy. In my case, I'm going to give an update on the HSMS2 challenge. As you're aware, 2 years ago, I started a challenge to train teachers because teachers are the strong point or the weak point, depending on where they are in the educational chain. We have so far disbursed almost $250,000. We've supported 60 projects in 20 African countries. We're targeting, and this basically has impacted about 60,000 children. Now, what we're targeting over time is to get to 1,500 projects, 10,000 teachers, 5 million pupils. And the idea is and these are teachers who are trying to develop innovative and low-cost approaches to delivering education to their localities, to villages, rural areas in Africa. So that's my big project, and that's what I'm reporting on.
And for the hosts, the U.S. President Joe Biden has also left the White House for New York to attend the 78th General Assembly of the United Nations. Air Force One took off on Sunday evening and landed in New York. The U.S. President will be addressing the General Assembly on Tuesday and hold meetings with other global leaders attending the Global Summit. And tens of thousands of protesters kicked off Climate Week and filled the streets of Midtown Manhattan on Sunday ahead of the UN General Assembly this week, calling for President Joe Biden and world leaders to end fossil fuel use. With parades, concerts, and banging drums, protesters waved signs sending a message to world leaders to save the planet from the use of oil and gas believed to be driving a warming globe. At a protest rally, Democratic U.S. Representative Alexandria Cortez called on President Biden and world leaders to end the use of fossil fuels across the world. Sunday's protests are part of a week-long international effort by Climate Group, a non-profit whose purpose is to drive climate change action and stop global warming, with more than 500 protests planned in the U.S., Germany, England, South Korea, India, and elsewhere, totaling 54 countries.
I'm so honored to be here today, shoulder to shoulder with you all, because we are all here for the same purpose, to protect the planet, the people, and make sure that we end fossil fuels across the globe. It means something when people say, oh, we're thinking $10,000 people are going to be here, and 70,000 people show up. That means something. This issue is one of the issues, the biggest issue of our time, and because of that, we must be too big and too radical to ignore. And we will not give up. We will not let go. We will not allow cynicism to prevail. We will not allow our vision of a collaborative economy, of dignity for working people, of honoring the black, brown, indigenous, white working class. We will not give up. And that is what we are here to do today, to tell our leaders, from President Biden to the UN General Assembly, to all of our elected officials, that we demand to change. It will happen now. It begins today. It is occurring today. And it's because of you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Keep marching, and we're going to accomplish this. See ya.
Let's check in on other stories now. China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi is visiting Russia for security talks, and he's expected to discuss the war in Ukraine with his Russian counterpart, Sergei Lavrov. According to a statement from the Chinese Foreign Ministry, Mr. Wang will visit Russia from September the 18th through to the 21st. His visit comes after Vladimir Putin's meeting with North Korea's Kim Jong-un. Russian media said Mr. Wang's trip would also lay the ground for Mr. Putin to make a landmark visit to Beijing, which is coming up pretty soon. Poland, Slovakia and Hungary have announced their own restrictions on Ukrainian grain imports, and this comes after the European Commission decided not to extend its ban on imports into Ukraine's 5 EU neighbors. EU Trade Commissioner Valdis Dombrovskis said that the countries should refrain from unilateral measures against imports of Ukraine grain, but Poland, Slovakia and Hungary immediately responded with reimposing their own restrictions on Ukrainian grain imports. They will continue to allow the transit of Ukrainian produce. Poland's agricultural minister said the ban would include 4 cereals and meals from corn, wheat and rapeseed. As for Hungary, it's imposed a national import ban on 24 Ukrainian agricultural products, including grains, vegetable, several meat products and honey. Slovakia's agriculture minister also followed suit, announcing its own grain ban. And in reaction to this ban, the Spanish Agri Minister says countries taking unilateral action restricting access to the single market seems to be something illegal. According to Louis Panchard, it's left to the European Commission to judge.
the fact that any member country, I'm not judging one member country, but any member country takes unilateral action restricting what is the access to the single market seems to me something that is out of the law, but is to the Commission to judge. So is why we will have a council beginning at 10 a.m. And during this afternoon discussion, we will listen from the Commission, and I wait as presidency the explanation of what has been achieved on Friday and what is the follow-up that the Commission will take about the decision. I understand 3 member states, for the moment being, that have announced unilateral restrictions on that.
And the United States is expected to announce additional aid to Ukraine as U.S. President Joe Biden would be hosting Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky on Thursday, September 21st at the White House. White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan made this known, adding that President Zelensky is expected to meet with congressional leaders from both political parties while he is in Washington, D.C.
President Biden will then return to Washington to host President Zelensky of Ukraine here at the White House on Thursday. And this will be their 3rd meeting here at the White House, and it certainly comes at a critical time, as Russia desperately seeks help from countries like North Korea for its brutal war in Ukraine, as Ukrainian forces continue to make progress in their counteroffensive, and just after the next Ukraine Defense Contact Group meeting that Secretary Austin is organizing with dozens of our allies and partners in Europe earlier next week, as we continue to coordinate the provision of arms and equipment to help Ukrainian forces. We are always preparing a new military package for Ukraine. As you know, we do these presidential drawdown packages essentially every couple of weeks, and I think you can anticipate that there will be a further announcement of additional resources and capabilities, additional weapons to go to Ukraine as they continue this counteroffensive and to defend against Russian attacks at some point next week. And I think he's looking forward to the opportunity not just to see President Biden here at the White House, but also to see congressional leaders from both parties to make the case that the United States has been a great friend and partner to Ukraine throughout this entire brutal war, and that the United States should continue to do that. We have confidence that there will be bipartisan support for this. I think President Zelensky does as well, and he wants to build momentum towards that as we head to the end of the month.
And former U.S. President Donald Trump says he had warned Russian President Vladimir Putin against starting the conflict in Ukraine. Speaking to the conservative Concerned Women for America group, Mr. Trump added that Russia's invasion of Ukraine would not have happened if he remained in power.
But The Apprentice was great. But he said, you fired, and I fired a lot of people, but we're going to have to fire a lot more because that deep state runs deeper than we thought. Before I even arrive at the Oval Office, shortly after I win the presidency, I will have the horrible war between Russia and Ukraine settled, and it would have never happened. It would have never, ever happened if I was there. I used to talk to Putin about it. I've said it very openly. I talked to him about it. It was the apple of his eye. I said, don't do it, Vladimir. Don't do it, Vladimir. Oh, you'll be making such a mistake. And I told him a couple of things. He said, you wouldn't do that. I said, yes, I will. No, you wouldn't. And he probably didn't believe me, but he believed me 10%. That's all you needed. But I said, don't do it. As soon as I left, they started to form. And the most embarrassing moment in the history of our country, and Putin saw that, and China saw that, and they saw that we had a lot of very incompetent people.
And North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has left Russia after a week-long visit to the eastern region. Video from a Russian news agency on Sunday showed the Russian ministers and governors seeing off the North Korean leader at the railway station in Russia's far eastern city of Artyom. The North Korean leader can be seen walking along a red carpet to his train carriage in the Russian far eastern city of Artyom, and waving goodbye to the sounds of a military band. The distance from the city to Kherson station on Russia's border with North Korea is over 200 kilometers. as the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un concluded his visit to Russia on Sunday, he did not leave empty-handed. Russia gave out gifts including a fur hat, body armor and military drones, which on their own are a violation of UN sanctions. Kim received a fur hat from Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu in Vladivostok, where he inspected Russian nuclear bombers, fighter jets equipped with hypersonic missiles and a warship. Oleg Kosmoyako, the governor of Primorsky region, presented Kim with a set of modern lightweight body armor designed for assault operations. Mr. Kim was also presented with 5 one-way attack drones and a Geranium-25 reconnaissance drone, which is widely used in the war in Ukraine, violating at least 2 UN Security Council resolutions against the North for its banned missile and nuclear activities, which Moscow voted to approve. To other stories, the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has visited a migrant reception center on the Italian island of Lampedusa after the country's Prime Minister called for EU help with small boat arrivals. More than 8,000 migrants have arrived on the island for over the past 3 days. Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni says Italy is being placed under unsustainable pressure. Ms. von der Leyen acknowledged on Sunday that the issue was a European challenge and needs a European answer.
The European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen arrived in Lampedusa on Sunday, September 17, as dozens of island citizens protested over a recent surge in migrant arrivals. She was joined by Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, who on Friday called for the European Union to act jointly with a naval mission if necessary to prevent migrants from North Africa crossing the Mediterranean.
To offer a coordinated response by the Italian and European authorities.
Nearly 126,000 migrants have arrived in Italy this year, almost double the figure by the same date in 2022. The protesters said they wanted to send a message to the European community that Lampedusa can no longer take the influx. Others said Lampedusa has had enough and that the message had to be conveyed to European governments. Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, who showed up to address citizens at the protest, said he'd asked the European Commission President to come to Lampedusa to personally realize the gravity of the situation faced on the small island. Ms. von der Leyen was taken around the island. While visiting a reception center for migrants, she heard residents speak on the situation there. Resident and Town Hall Councillor Elisa Frappane said they saw suffering children without parents. She said the meeting on Sunday had to be decisive and must ensure that the whole system has a definitive turning point. Otherwise, the situation will not improve. Addressing a press conference after, Ms. von der Leyen said European authorities, rather than people smugglers, will decide who comes to the European Union.
We will decide who comes to the European Union and under what circumstances.
She still appealed to residents, emphasizing that migration is a European challenge.
Migration is a European challenge and it needs a European answer and solution.
Last week, Italy transferred hundreds of migrants to Sicily from Lampedusa as the country struggles to cope with unprecedented number of migrants arriving by sea from North Africa. Lampedusa, Italy's first port of call for people crossing from North Africa, has long been a flashpoint in Europe's migration crisis.
Joining us now is immigration lawyer Dayo Fadinal. He joins us from the UK. Hello, good to have you on the program.
Oh, good evening, and it's a pleasure, and good evening to your viewers too.
Right, so Lampedusa has long been struggling with a surge in migrant arrivals. It's the port of arrival for many migrants coming from North Africa. Well, this is not the first time the people have cried out against migrant influx, is it?
Indeed, yes, that's the case. Migrants have actually been coming to this very small island, closer to Tunisia than Italy for so many years. I want to believe that they've actually started coming to this island since 2007, 15 years ago. But the problem with the island is the fact that they've been taking in so many of these migrants for so many years. This year alone, they've taken on so many thousands of migrants coming from different parts of North Africa. For how long are they going to be doing this? For how long are they going to be, would they be able to at least take this influx of migrants coming to this small island? It's a pity that this is going on and happening. The number of migrants that actually came to Lampedusa some 3 days ago came to roughly about 8,500 migrants, more than the population of the small island, which is only just about 6,000. So it's a big problem, and I don't believe the inhabitants of this very small island can take this any longer. They've done their best, but the whole matter of migrants coming to the island is affecting the inhabitants phenomenally. So something would have to be done about this.
Right, and I guess this is why the EU Commission President visited the island. Illegal migration has been a big issue for the continent. Do you think Ms. von der Leyen's words provided any hope or comfort for people on the tiny island?
Well, yes, the presidents of the EU, of course, our words are quite important, but whether they actually provide any hope or any comfort for the inhabitants of this island is a different matter altogether. I'm not sure whether that will resolve the problem, because if we have a problem that's been going on for the last 15 years, and not much has been done about it, I doubt whether that will actually make a difference right now. It's a big problem for not just that very small island of Italy, but for the whole of the EU. The people have taken so much. The people living on this island have taken so much. Many of them have even actually gone out, done their best to help, and to at least do what they could, to at least help these poor migrants who are more or less human beings like you and I. They've done their best, but for how long could they actually take this and continue to help these inhabitants, this migrants?
Yeah, and Ms. von der Leyen has set out a 10-point plan, an EU action plan, one of which is to increase access to legal channels for the migrants to reduce smuggling. Migration is inevitable. How else would you suggest leaders approach the issue?
Well, you see, apart from actually trying to stop the migrants from coming to the island, I think there are so many other things the EU should be looking at. A good one is, a very good thing they should be doing is actually increasing the number of naval missions where many of these migrants could actually make use of. They should also try their best to make sure that the EU countries also share responsibility and an equal burden of actually taking in so many of these migrants. After all, you see, it's not easy for these migrants. They are coming from so many parts of Africa where life is not very particularly good for them. Doing their best, they have to leave. And this is happening because of so many failed governments we have in Africa. Because if things are actually working properly in many of these African countries, many of these people would not want to start risking their lives, walking across the deserts and also trying to, risking their lives, crossing the Mediterranean. So, the best they could do right now is just to, at least provide safe naval missions and do their best to rescue people who get stranded, and also do their best to have so many missions where many of these migrants could indeed claim asylum if they have to. And that's the best they could do right now, really.
Right, and we have indeed discussed the role of African leaders in curbing illegal migration to Europe. Do you think Africa is making this a priority?
Well, the issue of Africa and African leaders, I don't really believe that the plight of so many of these migrants is the priority for so many African countries. In fact, I mean, when we look at many of these African countries, we have very, very failed governments, failed policies, where if things are truly and really working in many of these African countries, many of these migrants would not want to, say they want to risk their lives, crossing the deserts, trying to actually cross the Mediterranean. So they don't. I don't believe many of these African countries truly and really care. I'm talking of the African governments. They don't. I don't really think they have any, steady, stabilized policy to be able to at least stop these migrants from crossing the desert, crossing the Mediterranean, because it's just not their priority. I mean, look at what's going on right now all over Africa. The coups in many of these French-speaking countries, the situation with Africa right now is appalling. And many of these African leaders are not truly and really doing anything about migrants, about these poor people trying to at least run away from Africa, really. That they're escaping Africa because of the failed policies and failed governments we have in Africa.
Right, and Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni's cabinet is meeting today to approve tough immigration measures, including building new detention and repatriation centers and extending the maximum time for which migrants can be held. What do you make of this?
Well, the European Union would have to do its best to try to curb many of these migrants coming to Europe, particularly through Italy and so many other European countries. But you see, it's one thing for you to at least build more centers for migrants to be assessed, and doing what you could do to, extend many of the countries where they could at least seek refuge. But I think the major problem is, it's one thing for you to be doing that, but at the same time, you would have to actually get to the root of the problem itself. And the problem is, why is it the case that so many of these migrants want to leave Africa? What is the EU doing to at least do their best to support governments in Africa and not support, dictatorial governments that would not actually do much for their citizens, do not care about their citizens? They keep on harboring and making the case of the fact that there should be democracy in Africa. Fine. But at the end of the day, when we have failed governments, people want to leave that country. So what is the EU doing to make sure that we have effective, smooth running governments in Africa that would at least want to make the citizens of so many of these African countries to want to stay in Africa and not want to risk their lives across the deserts and across the Mediterranean Sea? That's one thing the EU has not been doing at all. They keep on going on about their centers. They want to increase centers. They want to repatriate migrants who actually cross over. But that's not truly and really solving the problem. It's just part of that problem. The main thing they need to be doing is to deal with the source, and do what they need to do to encourage migrants to want to stay in Africa. And they would only be able to do that through doing what they have to do to encourage African governments, or to make them understand the fact that they need to at least do something about their citizens that will prevent those citizens from wanting to leave Africa and come to Europe. I think that should be a major, major thing they should be looking at.
Right. Immigration lawyer Daya Fadina, thank you for joining us on the program today.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thank you very much. Thank you.
It's a week after devastating floods and rainfall hit the city of Derna in Libya. Some residents were sitting together on Monday morning, along with the ruined streets with damaged shops. People whose homes were swept away by flooding in the eastern city are facing the dilemma of whether to stay or risk infection or flee through areas where landmines have been displaced by torrents. Thousands of people were killed after two dams above Derna broke on September 10. during a powerful storm, bringing down residential blocks, lining a usually dry riverbed as people slept. Many bodies have been washed out to sea. Unfortunately, the situation in Derna is far from being stable, and this is according to the UNHCR. The UN Refugee Agency has released a video appealing for donations in the aftermath of the deadly floods, asking for urgent support for the areas devastated, specifically for Derna. Speaking from the flood-hit Libyan eastern city, the UNHCR's Libya head of protection, Rana Saifi, described the situation as horrific.
One of the cities that has been affected the most by Storm Daniel, which hit last Sunday the eastern parts of Libya. As you can see from the surroundings behind me, the situation is horrific. I cannot explain what I saw on the way coming to Derna. I saw roads split in half. I saw massive rocks that have been moved over from neighboring mountains to the coastal areas. Homes have been demolished, damaged, submerged underwater. Families have lost a very big number of their loved ones. Many are still missing, some have been split, and others have been displaced. The search and rescue teams continue to try to save lives, but the situation is far from being stable at the moment. UNHCR has already provided core relief items as a first and immediate response, and we're working with our local partners to provide a lot more to try to mitigate the impact on those families who continue to suffer tremendous amount of shock. But the needs are huge, and a lot more support is needed and urgent.
5 American citizens jailed for years in Iran are set to be on their way back home in the U.S. as part of a prisoner swap deal. The 4 men and 1 woman who also hold Iranian passports took off in a Qatari jet from the Iranian capital, Tehran. Their release was dependent on the transfer of $6 billion in Iranian funds earned from selling oil to South Korea to banks in Doha, which is now said to have been completed. 5 Iranians imprisoned in the U.S. are expected to be freed at the same time as part of the swap, which was mediated by Qatar. The International Committee of the Red Cross has sent humanitarian convoys to the breakaway Karabakh region from Armenia and Azerbaijan, simultaneously reopening the road link to Armenia, blockaded since December. Karabakh is internationally recognized as part of Azerbaijan, but has an overwhelmingly ethnic Armenian population, which won de facto independence from Baku in the early 1990s after a lengthy war. Azerbaijan has effectively blockaded Karabakh since December 2022, causing acute hunger in the region. Azerbaijan and the Karabakh Separatist Administration agreed to simultaneously reopen the 2 roads earlier this month, with a single Russian aid truck entering Karabakh from Azerbaijan, and the first restoration of district transport links since 1988. At least 14 people have died after a small jet they boarded crashed in Brazil's northern Amazonas state, according to the state's governor, Wilson Lima. The victims were tourists and their plane crashed as a result of an error in the route taken at the time of landing. The accident took place in the Barcelos province, some 400 kilometers from the state capital, Manaus. The Brazilian Air Force said in a statement that investigators from the Accident Investigation and Prevention Center had been called in to begin an investigation into the reasons for the crash of the small aircraft and Embraer with the registration PTSOG. And many people in Sydney are braving the sun to head outdoors, with some sunbathing under the intense heat on the beaches in Clovelly, Manly and near the Sydney Harbour. Temperatures in large parts of Australia's southeast are expected to peak up to 16 degrees Celsius above the September average, causing a spring heat wave across the area to intensify. The Australian Weather Bureau forecast temperatures in Sydney's west are expected to hit 36 degrees Celsius on Monday before dropping to about 22 degrees Celsius on Thursday. The country is baking through a rising heat wave which has been building in the country's outback interior over the weekend and is likely to last until Wednesday across the states of South Australia, Victoria, and New South Wales. The Bureau of Meteorology said it expects several early spring records likely to be broken over the next few days, calling the heat very uncommon for the month of September. The annual Oktoberfest traditional costume parade in Munich held on Sunday with hundreds of proud Bavarians wearing their finest traditional clothes. Always held on the second day of the world's largest beer festival, the parade is a chance for the locals to show off their best Bavarian costumes, or what's known as in German as Tracht. As it's the custom, men wore lederhosen or leather trousers, which are either short or knee length, often with a checkered shirt, high woolly socks and a hat with a feather, sometimes known as a Tyrolean or Alpine hat, from where it originated. Women wear dirndl corseted dresses characterized by fine detailing, as well as a lace up front and apron. Traditionally, if the apron bow is tied to the left, it means a lady is single, but on the right means she's taken. Oktoberfest has its origins in a horse race that took place in 1810 to celebrate the wedding of a Bavarian Crown Prince Ludwig and Princess Therese of Saxony-Hildburghausen. The parade first took place in 1835 to honor the 25th wedding anniversary of the couple. Since then, the parade consists of thousands of participants who follow the route through Munich's town center to the Oktoberfest location. 716 guests from Austria, South Tyrol, Italy, Switzerland, Croatia, and Serbia also took part in the 7-kilometer-long procession of 40 floats.
Actually, it's already famous in the world, and we know that here in Oktoberfest is the first one in the world. That's why we heard from our colleagues, because we're working in the hospital, and they said it was a great event here in Germany.
Interesting festival. That's our program today. Thank you for watching. I'm Joke Rogers.